What if I told you that NASA simulates the gravity of other planets, right here on Earth? It sounds like something out of a movie, conspiracy theory, or cheap science fiction. But what if it's real? What if there are leaked documents, hidden images and testimonies from former employees that point to one of the most secret operations of the most powerful space agency in the world? Imagine for a moment that everything you saw about space missions, astronauts floating and training in zero gravity, was nothing more than a big, carefully planned act in underground laboratories and camouflaged military bases NASA has been conducting. Gravity simulation tests to train astronauts for decades. But what few people know, or perhaps don't even suspect, is that these simulations can hide something much bigger. Why so much secrecy? Why are these facilities inaccessible to the public? And more, what is really being tested on them? Lunar gravity, Martian, or ... something even darker. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. These secret installations, some located in isolated deserts, others within military structures, have been the scene of experiments that go far beyond physical training. There are reports that indicate tests with anti-gravity technologies, side effects on astronauts, and even attempts to replicate extraterrestrial environments, all with billions of dollars in funding and direct supervision from government agencies. Have you ever wondered why some missions seem more staged than real? Why do certain NASA videos feature strange cuts, inconsistent shadows, and movements that defy the laws of physics? The theory that these recordings would be made in simulated environments here on Earth is gaining more and more strength, and we're not just talking about internet theories. There are documents, there is evidence, there are names. This video is not about denialism, it's about questions that need to be asked, about information that seems forbidden and that perhaps someone is trying to hide from you. After all, if everything were so transparent, why is there still so much under lock and key in NASA's archives? Get ready, because what comes now will shake up everything you thought you knew about space. And the truth behind the most famous space missions in history. And while you absorb all of this, stop for a moment and think. Why does an agency like NASA, with billions in budget and cutting-edge technology, still need to simulate space environments with so much secrecy? Why not disclose everything openly if it was all really just training? What is behind these gravity simulations that is so jealously hidden from us? And most importantly, what do you think about this? If this topic makes sense to you, leave here. In the comments, what has caught your attention the most so far? Your opinion can open up new lines of thought and help others see beyond the surface. The conversation that arises here is the fuel that drives this channel, and when you share what you feel or think, you are not just interacting. You are collaborating in a collective investigation. And since you're here, if this type of content intrigues you, engages you, and makes you want to know more, don't forget to like the video. This helps the algorithm understand that this topic deserves to be seen by more people, by more curious minds like yours. Oh, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a step further into the behind the scenes of the space. The forgotten theories, the silent archives that are slowly coming to light. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that the mainstream media doesn't show. The community we are creating together is made up of people like you who question, investigate, and want to see beyond the official versions. And speaking of official versions, the next part of this story will reveal one of the most surprising connections between these secret gravity tests and missions that officially never happened. With the new space race heating up more than ever, it's easy to get distracted by the spotlight shining on reusable rockets, crewed missions, and ambitious announcements from companies like SpaceX. Elon Musk talks about colonizing Mars. NASA returns with plans for the moon through the Artemis program and other private agencies. emerge with almost cinematic promises to transform space into a new global market. But while everyone looks up, a silent part of this narrative unfolds below. Away from the cameras, surrounded by institutional silence and technical terms that hide more than they explain. And it is precisely in this blind spot in the silent, behind the scenes of this technological journey, that simulated gravity testing becomes more than a simple preparation exercise. Simulating the gravity of another planet is not like doing a gym workout. It requires highly specific conditions, advanced technology, and, above all, isolation, secret locations. Environments where every movement is monitored, every data is classified, and every image released goes through thorough filtering. There's a difference between faking for safety, and faking to cover up. This line, subtle and strategic, is what separates what we know from what really happens. And this is where the question remains. Are these tests just preparatory, or are they part of a fabricated narrative? Over the past few years, declassified files, discrete statements from former collaborators, and occasional flaws in NASA's own videos have begun to form a pattern. They are not definitive proofs, and perhaps they never will be, but they are fragments that, when connected, begin to paint a much broader picture than the official missions reveal. Places like the Neutral Buoyancy Facility in Houston, for example, have been touted as neutral gravity training environments. But there are records of activities there that have nothing to do with simple swimming in the pool. Documents show simulations made with adjustable gravity, something that, officially, shouldn't even exist. And here comes the most delicate point. Why develop technology to manipulate gravity if the declared application is just training? If astronauts are prepared for space, why exactly reproduce the effects of Mars or Moon gravity here on Earth instead of training in real microgravity conditions? As on the International Space Station. What is the need for such complexity, if the objective is simply to adapt the human body to a new physical condition? This kind of incongruity raises legitimate questions. And we're not talking about delusions or denialism. We're talking about a change of mentality. From looking at the structure of information and noticing how it is carefully organized to keep us within a comfortable script, where space exploration is clean, transparent, and progressive. But the reality has always been more complex. The hidden truth behind these secret programs isn't just in the rockets launched, it's in the silent decisions, the authorizations that never reach the public, and the leaks that are quickly discredited. Before they go viral, there is a kind of unspoken code that governs these missions. Something like, the more extraordinary the feat, the more acceptable it is to hide part of the truth. And the most curious thing is that this seems to work. Most people are satisfied with pretty pictures and inspiring speeches. But whoever looks beyond, whoever feels that something doesn't fit, starts to ask uncomfortable questions. And it is at this point that everything changes. The journey to truth stops being about space and becomes about controlling the narrative. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a direct link between these gravity tests and missions that, to this day, are treated as rumors, missions that disappeared from records. Astronauts who were trained but never officially sent into space. Bases that appeared and disappeared from maps. What if all of this is connected? Comment there, that makes sense to me, just so I know who also feels that this story goes far beyond what they tell us. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because, if we look closely, the way these gravity tests are conducted reveals much more than NASA's official discourse usually admits. The Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, known as NBF, is the most cited behind-the-scenes example in the scientific community. Officially, it is a giant pool used to train astronauts in an underwater environment simulating microgravity conditions. But the structure is gigantic, with highly restricted access and security protocols that surpass any common standard for a training center. The question that remains is, Why so much secrecy for something that should just be a simulation? There are videos circulating on the internet, silent, without context, often blurred, showing tests inside these facilities with equipment that has never been officially used on missions. Devices capable of changing the density of water in certain areas, creating pressure zones that imitate environments of varying gravity. This goes beyond training. This is manipulation. It's the type of technology that, if it's real, has a much greater impact than simply preparing a crew. We are talking about experiments that touch the boundary between physics and environmental control. And of course, all of this is kept out of the public eye under the argument of national security. But the mystery doesn't end there. Some deserts around the world, such as areas of New Mexico and desert regions of northern Canada, are identified by independent researchers as sites for soil testing and reduced gravity locomotion. Officially, they are Mars simulations. But there are reports of underground pressurized chambers built to test the human body's reaction to alternating gravities. One of these locations, according to documents leaked on forums and reports deleted shortly after being published, would have been used to isolate volunteers in environments with gravity similar to that of the Moon for weeks. No official NASA mission would require this type of experiment with this duration and absolute isolation. And yet, they happened. They are registered. It is precisely at this point that the enigma intensifies. If astronauts have already been to the Moon, why the need to retest these conditions in such extreme and secret environments? Why create sealed environments that simulate the gravitational field of other planets so faithfully? Was it just part of an improvement program? Or a repetition of a theater that needs to be rehearsed to perfection? The most disturbing thing is that the reports from former employees and outsourced technicians who worked in these places are almost all the same in one detail. They mention that they were prohibited from taking cameras, cell phones, or any recording device. Everything was done with handwritten notes collected at the end of the day. This leads us to further reflection. There is a type of hidden truth that is not protected by direct lies, but by well-placed silences. It's what's between the lines of public reports. In NASA videos, where a part of the sequence is always missing, in the vague answers when someone asks the right question. What if these gravity tests are hiding something that not even the astronauts themselves are allowed to fully know? What if the reality of what is experienced inside, in these trainings, and in these simulations, is part of a preparation for something bigger? Something that will never be announced at a press conference. Many believe that the biggest illusion in space exploration is about what's out there. But perhaps the real enigma lies in what is being developed here. In the name of science, security, human evolution. These are beautiful words, but they easily become shields for decisions that would not withstand the light of public debate. When an operation depends on so much control, so much secrecy, so much narrative manipulation, it is no longer just a technical experiment. It becomes a symbol, a tool. In construction of reality, these structures, both physical and symbolic, shape the way we see the universe, and mainly what we believe is possible. It's not just about science. It's about perception, confidence, power. And all of this involves silent decisions made in rooms that no civilian has ever set foot in. Gravity simulations become, in this context, more than physical preparation. They are part of a narrative carefully designed to guide our collective mindset, to make us accept as absolute truth what, perhaps, was never real. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Just so. I know who is really paying attention to the signs and willing to continue questioning what we were taught to accept. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a layer to this plot that few have the courage to explore. What if all the images you've seen to date about gravity on the Moon or Mars are, in fact, the result of simulations so advanced that they have become indistinguishable from reality? It may seem bold to say this, but there is an increasing volume of reports, signs, and statements that point precisely in this direction, and the transformation in the way we perceive these records may be more profound than it seems at first glance. In files released by the Freedom of Information Act, some documents reveal that NASA developed in the 70s and 80s optical and physical simulation technologies in controlled environments, with the aim of testing human reactions in situations of extraplanetary exploration. The curious detail is that many of these simulations were filmed with very high quality, even superior to recordings of real missions from that same time. This raises an inevitable question: why so much investment in recording simulations? If the objective would only be internal training, who was the real audience for these videos? Whistleblowers like Ken Johnston, a former NASA employee, have publicly stated that many of the photos and recordings that have reached the public have undergone treatments that he called strategic cleaning. According to him, images captured during the Apollo missions were edited to not generate public alarm. That is, was not just a matter of adjusting brightness or contrast, but rather of changing entire elements, removing what should not be seen, and, perhaps, inserting what would help keep the narrative cohesive. Another important name in this puzzle is Donna Hare, a former NASA contractor with access to the agency's photo editing sector. In several statements, she says that she saw colleagues being instructed to delete unidentified objects from space images, and even more so, that there was an internal protocol to deal with visual inconsistencies in images captured of the lunar surface. That in itself would be disturbing enough. But it goes further. Donna reports that some of the images that reached the media and school books were never taken in space, but rather inside studios simulating the lunar soil, controlled lighting, and specific filters to create the famous low gravity effect. Now think with me. If there is the technical capacity to faithfully simulate lunar gravity, control the scenery, manipulate lighting, and create visual effects compatible with what we expect to see, then what is the limit between a real mission and a highly technological staging? In a time where CGI, augmented reality, and physical simulations have reached levels that are almost indistinguishable from the real thing, how can we trust 100% in the images that are delivered to us, especially when they come from a source that also has a political, economic, and strategic interest in the domain of space? This is the part that forces us to review our mindset, because it's no longer just about asking, is this true? But rather to question what truth we were allowed to see. Manipulation of space images, when confirmed, not only distorts technical facts, it reconstructs our perception of advancement, of achievement, of humanity. And, in doing so, it also shapes our relationship with reality, with the unknown, and with what we call the future. There are videos, for example, where astronauts on the moon make movements that, analyzed in slow motion and compared with simulations here on Earth, reveal a strange similarity. The dust moves in trajectories that defy predicted lunar gravity. The shadows point in conflicting directions, as if there were more than one source of light, which, in theory, shouldn't happen, since the sun would be the only lighting available. Coincidence? Technical error? Or evidence of an overly controlled environment? Many proponents of these theories have been marginalized, labeled lunatics, silenced, or ridiculed. But still, they persist. Because, like every uncomfortable truth, it doesn't disappear. It just changes place until it is discovered by whoever decides to look more closely. And when you start to put together the reports, documents, and visual anomalies, you realize that there is an evident effort to keep a certain narrative standing. And this effort requires resources, planning, and above all, a very strong reason. This isn't just a conspiracy theory. It is an invitation for deeper investigation. It is the beginning of a journey that mixes technology behind-the-scenes decisions, and a hidden truth that little by little slips through the cracks of institutional silence. The most curious thing is that the more technology we have to analyze these old records with software that evaluates lighting, depth, and structure of images, the more inconsistencies arise, as if evolution itself was helping us see what was previously impossible to see right there. That makes sense to me. Just to know who is connected to this search for truth behind the polished surface of official images. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we enter the territory of evidence, we stop dealing only with hypotheses and start observing what was actually recorded, what is documented, even if in a fragmented, dispersed, or purposefully disconnected way. There are files that have been leaked over the years, many of them ignored by the mainstream media, but which carry details that completely change the way we understand what NASA does when no one is looking. There are technical reports, untreated images, raw recordings, and even small excerpts from videos that never reach the public in their edited versions. And they all have something in common. They show what shouldn't be shown. In 2016, for example, a set of confidential documents was accessed through a digital security breach. Among the leaked data, there were direct mentions of operations conducted in isolated regions of the Arctic. These locations, according to the information, were used to simulate soil, climate, and mainly reduced gravity conditions. The official justification: tests for biological adaptation and mobility in extraterrestrial environments. But when we analyze the technical reports, what we can see is that the protocols applied there were not aimed at physical or psychological training. The focus was to simulate accurately the response of objects and materials to artificial CL gravities. In other words, they were testing scenarios that, when filmed, would easily pass for real scenes from Mars or the Moon. These images, many of them in low resolution or with corrupted sections, still show metal structures assembled in an open field, machinery covered with black screens, and movements that appear to be choreographed. In one of these scenes, it is possible to see a human figure, supposedly a technician, falling in slow motion, as if under the effect of a gravitational field smaller than that of Earth. There are no visible strings. There is no clear explanation for the physical behavior of that body. Just a video identification number and a note: adjusted simulated gravity, 0.38 grams, double quotes. Another point that reinforces this line of reasoning are the comparisons between official NASA videos and content created with state-of-the-art CGI computer animation. Independent groups of visual analysts have carried out tests, applying artificial intelligence filters to identify synthetic patterns in old space videos. The result: many of the files considered original presented typical characteristics of digital composition, such as artificial shadows, overlapping elements, and depth of field incompatible with analog cameras of the time. In one of these videos recorded during the Apollo 17 mission, it is possible to notice a floating of lunar dust in a straight line, without dispersion, a behavior that, according to physics, could only occur in a closed environment or with airflow. But on the Moon, there is no atmosphere for this to happen. And yet, the phenomenon is there, recorded, repeated in more than one filming. Could it be a technical error, a defect in the camera, or a detail that went unnoticed in a controlled recreation? There are also inconsistencies in cast shadows. In certain scenes, astronauts cast shadows in opposite directions, suggesting multiple light sources. But if the only spotlight on the field would be the sun, how can this divergence be explained? Film studios have already faced similar challenges when recreating lunar environments for fictional productions, and interestingly, they faced the same visual errors that we see in real NASA videos. These isolated elements may seem insignificant, but when aligned side by side within a larger context, they construct a completely different narrative. A narrative in which each image, each fall, each speck of dust in the air begins to have symbolic weight. Not just because of what they show, but because of what they try to hide. And then the question stops being, is this real? And it becomes why was this shown like this? In a world driven by visual storytelling, image manipulation becomes one of the most subtle and effective weapons, because it doesn't require you to lie, just that you direct your gaze. And if, for decades, we were led to believe that certain images represented historic milestones of humanity, when in fact they were carefully constructed scenes, then we are talking about something much bigger than a simple technical error. We are talking about a deliberate decision, a silent pact between truth and convenience. The impact of this on our way of understanding space is profound. Because if reality can be simulated with such precision, confidence in what we see depends more on the intention of those who show it than on the image itself. And that changes everything. Change our mindset. It changes the way we position ourselves. In the face of historical events, it changes what we accept as fact. Right there, that makes sense to me, just so. I know who is realizing how much these revelations are redrawing the border between what is true and what only seems to be. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because, as expected, NASA has an official answer to all of this. According to their spokespeople and public documents, all these installations, simulations, and visual recordings are an essential part of an extensive training program for astronauts. The argument is simple, and at first glance, quite rational. If we are going to send human beings to extreme environments like the Moon or Mars, we need to prepare them to react in the safest and most efficient way possible when faced with unknown situations. It makes sense. But if everything is so scientific, so safe, so necessary, why so much secrecy? Why the constant feeling that there is something beyond what is being said? NASA insists that places like the NBF, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, are just environments that mimic weightlessness. That simulating gravity in deserts or underground chambers is a practical way of adapting the human body to other gravitational conditions. They talk about engineering protocols, biomechanical tests, physiological impact research, and use enough technical terms to avoid any deeper questions. But the truth is that behind this polished vocabulary, there is a gap that pure science does not answer. A kind of deliberate silence between the words, as if the answers were there. But there was always one piece missing, and it is precisely this part that starts to bother. Because if the goal is just to train, why isn't there complete transparency? In the processes, why are so many areas of the facility classified as restricted access, even for employees who work in other areas of the agency? Why do certain images need to be edited before being released to the public? Why are raw recordings rarely made public uncut? And why do testimonies from people who worked in these structures end up being discredited or forgotten? Some videos used in NASA publicity campaigns show excerpts from training simulating lunar walks with inspiring phrases in the background, such as "the future of humanity depends on what we test today." It's beautiful. But when you look at the raw, unedited technical material, you realize that many of these drills are so detailed, so precise, and so choreographed that they seem designed not just for internal learning, but for later use as visual material, as if they were pre-produced to create a visual narrative coherent with future missions. This is where legitimate doubt arises. If there is already technology to test suits, gravity, chemical reactions, and even human behavior in simulated space, to what extent are we still seeing reality? Or better yet, how many of these images that we think are the record of a historical feat are, in fact, previous simulations that have become too convenient not to be used as official ones? This line between simulation and reality is not new. In any large-scale process, be it a space mission or a public health campaign, there are always trials, tests, repetitions. But when these tests become the public image of the truth, without warning, without transparency, without clear information that it is just a simulation, then we are entering the territory of narrative manipulation. We are no longer just preparing. Astronauts, we are shaping perceptions. And this, inevitably, creates an impact. Because the average citizen, the one who grows up dreaming of the stars, trusts what he sees. He places his hope in every image released, in every announcement of an unprecedented achievement, in every video that shows a human being walking on extraterrestrial soil. When these images are full of doubts, inconsistencies, and signs of editing, the problem stops being technical and becomes ethical. It stops being about science and becomes about trust. Of course, NASA also faces limits imposed by law enforcement agencies. It is not an isolated agency. There are contracts with the government, with the military sector, with private companies that invest heavily in these projects. And this creates a tangle of interests that makes it impossible to know where science goes and where theater begins. But what if this theater is part of the game? What if creating the illusion of advancement, of conquest, of technological superiority is a geopolitical tool like any other? Maybe that's why certain videos are released so carefully, with invisible scripts that direct exactly what the viewer should feel: emotion, pride, hope, never doubt. And here we come to a delicate point. It is not an accusation. It's not saying that nothing is real. It's just lift the curtain and face the fact that, perhaps, not everything that was shown to us is exactly how it happened. And that changes our position in history, because we are no longer just spectators. We become part of the narrative shaped by the images, conditioned by the phrases, guided by decisions we never hear being made. Right there, I'm on this journey too, just so I can understand who is with me in this search for something more than ready-made answers. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because among so many files, videos, and reports that slip through the corners of a highly controlled system, one in particular draws attention not because of its grandeur, but because of the absolute silence around it. An internal report, little commented on even among the most skeptical. Circles describes something that goes beyond the traditional gravity simulation narrative. He mentions, in an objective and almost clinical way, that one of the experiments conducted in a controlled environment resulted in unexpected physiological reactions. In a group of astronauts in training, the expression used in the document is unforeseen side effects during simulation of a lunar environment with artificial gravity. That sentence alone would be enough to trigger an alert, but the report goes further. He details that during a prolonged session of exposure to a reduced gravitational field recreated by a technology that is not described in detail, 2 of the participants presented temporary neurological changes, sensory confusion, and momentary loss of spatial orientation. We're not talking about common seasickness or physical stress. We are talking about a direct impact on the central nervous system. Something that, according to the report's authors themselves, was not expected by the technical projections. Now, think with me. If a simulated environment created within the Earth itself was capable of inducing this type of reaction, what does this tell us about the degree of control involved? And more, what is the true purpose of these tests if it is already known that they can exceed the limits of the physical and mental safety of those involved? There are those who say that this episode was immediately hushed up with those involved, being removed and forced to sign contracts of silence. There are rumors that the equipment used on that occasion was dismantled and replaced with safer models, although to this day, no one outside the agency's inner circle knows exactly what caused the observed effects. And here is where the plot takes on an even darker turn, because it's not just about technical testing. When the effects of a simulation affect human cognition, we enter a field that borders on unauthorized experimentalism. The border between science and ethics begins to blur. There are international laws that regulate experiments on humans, especially when they involve manipulation of perception, consciousness, and biological reaction. But when these experiments are carried out under the justification of preparation for space missions and within classified facilities. Who supervises? Who has access to what is actually being done? Some independent analysts crossing data from this report with testimonies from former employees suggest that certain gravimetric tests may, in fact, be related to biological control experiments in isolated environments. This includes testing with altered atmospheric pressure, modulated electromagnetic fields, low-frequency sounds, all combined with reduced gravity. The objective would be to observe how far the human body and mind can adapt or resist extreme conditions. But what no one openly discusses is the real reason for this search. Was it just scientific curiosity? Or preparation for something bigger, something that is still beyond the reach of public understanding? The possibility that these simulations are, in fact, layers of multifunctional tests, not just physical, but psychological, cognitive, and even behavioral begins to make sense when we look at the pattern of secrecy. A secrecy that not only protects the technology, but mainly what it causes. And it is at this point that the line between experiment and cover-up dissolves. What should be a laboratory comes dangerously close to a human testing field with all that this represents in ethical, moral, and even legal terms. Now, if we turn our attention to the behind the scenes of these operations, it is difficult to ignore the constant presence of contracts with military institutions and large defense companies. Many of the programs classified as logistical assistance for space exploration have a joint budget with agencies that work directly with biotechnology, neuromodulation, and manipulation of isolated environments. It seems too coincidental. In documents obtained by investigative journalists, there are mentions of a project called Sentinel Phase, linked to body response tests in artificial environments, but with confidentiality clauses that prohibited those involved from even confirming the existence of the program. This intersection between space science, biological control, and military interests creates a new perspective. Because, at this point in the journey, we stop asking with, "They are hiding something," and starts asking, what exactly is being hidden? What happens inside these cold-lit rooms where bodies are exposed to unnatural conditions? What do we hope to learn from these reactions? And, most importantly, who authorized all of this? Right there, that makes sense to me, just so I know who is able to see how much this network of revelations can transform our understanding of what is being done in the name of science, and how far this really serves humanity. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after all this, it is almost impossible not to ask yourself, and if all this is true, what else is NASA secretly testing? The simulated gravity may have been just the surface of something much larger. What if the tests aren't just about physical endurance or spatial adaptation? What if what is being evaluated, discreetly, is how the human mind reacts to truths that we are not yet ready to hear? This type of reflection is not comfortable. It does not come with ready-made answers, much less with guarantees. But it is precisely in this discomfort that true transformation begins. Because there is a point in the journey where we stop consuming information just out of curiosity and start observing patterns. And when you look calmly, carefully, everything starts to fall into place, or worse, to make more sense than it should. Let's think about something that seems simple, but is full of impact. What leads an organization to hide, for decades, data, videos, and entire documents from public access? What justifies so much control over information that, theoretically, belongs to humanity as a whole? And more, why insist on repeating rigid official versions, even when the contradictions are right before our eyes? The answer may not just lie in the technologies involved. It is in the mentality of those who manage the future. If there's anything we've learned from history, it's that manipulating the truth always begins in silence. A small omission here, an omitted piece of information there, a generic explanation where there should be transparency. Little by little, this invisible construction, shapes what we call reality and the most dangerous. It's just that everything seems absolutely normal. Nobody questions it because the answers seem to be already there, ready-made, standardized, created to generate comfort, not awareness. Now look how sophisticated this gear is. NASA, with its prestige, its scientific authority, it's almost mythological. Image built on decades of achievements and heroic narratives becomes the perfect shield. Who dares to question an institution that represents the pinnacle of human technology? Who raises their voice without being immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist or misinformed? And that is precisely where the danger lies. Because hidden truth is not protected with high walls or complex passwords. It is protected with reputation. But what if we are being prepared for something? Something that has not yet been fully revealed, but is already in the testing, analysis, and simulation phase. It wouldn't be the first time in history that the scientific elite has conducted experiments before giving us the filtered version of the suits. The difference is that now we have access to fragments, traces, voices that escaped censorship and decided to tell what they saw. And even though these pieces are loose, the design they form begins to become visible to anyone who decides to look closely. The question is no longer whether NASA is hiding something. The question is what exactly she doesn't want us to see. There is a distance between the public narrative and what happens behind the scenes, and the more you dig, the more you realize that this distance was never casual. It was planned, aligned, with larger interests, perhaps even outside the agency itself, but which depend on it to maintain the stability of the official version. And this is not just a hypothesis. It's a structure. It's a choice. A decision made by someone at some time that certain information simply should not be accessed by the common citizen. And that, honestly, should make us reflect about how easily we accept, about how much of our trust is placed in symbols and not in evidence. And most importantly, about the kind of future that is being built based on data that we can't even see. So, if you've come this far, if this information has resonated somewhere within you, perhaps it's time to embrace this concern as part of your own journey. Not as paranoia, but as critical awareness. Because when we stop accepting everything as it is handed to us, we start asking questions that really matter. Comment there. They are definitely hiding more, just to find out. Whose eyes are more open than ever? If you've made it this far, it's because something in this content really touched you. And perhaps, like me, you also feel that there are questions that can no longer be ignored. If this type of investigation, this exchange of ideas, and this dive behind the scenes of what we have always been told is the truth makes sense to you, then subscribe to the channel, not as a number, but as part of a community that thinks, questions, and goes deep. Leave a like if this conversation connected you in some way. He is the one who shows that it is worth continuing to bring this type of content with even more depth, more revelations, and more courage. And take the opportunity to comment below with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end." Just so I know who really stayed until the last second and is on this journey with me. There's a video here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and stay with me there, because this story is still far from over.